"You need to go home." That was the first thing Brennan Collier said to her. Not hello. Not are you all right. Just that 4 words, flat and direct, the way he said most things. She looked up at him from the bench outside the emergency entrance of St. Michael's Hospital, Toronto, and she didn't answer right away. Her scrubs were soaked through at the shoulders from the freezing rain that had been coming down since 9 o'clock. Her hair was plastered against her neck. She was sitting with her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped around herself, and she was shaking, not dramatically, not in a way that asked for attention, just the small, constant trembling of a body that had been cold for too long. Brennan had been walking to his car, that was all. He'd been at St. Michael's for a board meeting that had run 90 minutes over schedule, and he was tired, and he had a call with Vancouver at 7 the next morning, and he was thinking about neither of those things when he saw her. He stopped. He didn't know why, exactly. He passed people on the street every day without stopping. He was not, by nature, a man who stopped. But she was barefoot. That was what caught him. Not her face, not the shaking. Her bare feet, flat against the wet concrete, the cold coming off the pavement in the way it does in November in Toronto, the kind of cold that climbs into your bones and stays there. Her shoes were beside her on the bench, soaked through and completely useless, and she was just sitting there as though she hadn't noticed, or as though she had noticed and had decided it didn't matter. "You need to go home," he said again. She looked at him then, really looked at him, brown eyes, direct, not frightened, more exhausted than anything else. She had the particular look of someone who had been professional all day and had nothing left over for the end of it. "I'm waiting for the bus," she said. "The 5:04 is suspended, flooding on King Street." She blinked. She hadn't known that. He watched her process it, the recalculation, the measuring of options, the particular stillness of someone realizing that the plan they'd been holding on to for the last hour no longer existed. He recognized it. He'd worn that expression in enough boardrooms to know it immediately. "I can call you a cab," he said. "I'm fine." "Your feet are blue." She looked down at them. He saw the slight surprise cross her face, as though she genuinely had stopped registering the cold. That told him more than anything she'd said. "I'm Brennan Collier," he said. "I'm on the hospital's board of directors. My car is 2 minutes from here. I'll drive you home." She stared at him. "I'm not trying to," he started. "I know who you are," she said. "I've seen you in the building." She paused. "Simone Archambault, pediatric intensive care." "I know," he said, and then stopped because he hadn't meant to say that. She tilted her head slightly. Rain ran down her temple. "You know my name." He had reviewed the PICU staffing reports 2 months ago as part of a resource allocation review. Her name had been flagged, not for anything negative, for the opposite. A note from the unit director about an unusually high patient outcome rate in the 6 to 12 age cohort, something about the way she managed pain assessment in nonverbal kids. He had read it, filed it, moved on. He did not tell her any of this. "It's a small hospital," he said. She looked at him for another long moment. Then she reached down and picked up her ruined shoes. "All right," she said. "Thank you." His car was a dark blue Volvo, which surprised her. She told him so. "What were you expecting?" he asked, pulling out of the parking structure. "I don't know, something flashier." "Flashy cars are for people who need other people to know they've arrived," he said. "I already know." She looked out the window at that. He drove in silence for a moment, the wipers going steadily against the rain. "Annex," she said, "on Palmerston, just north of Bloor." "I know the street." She directed him through the turns. The city outside was quiet in the way Toronto gets in heavy rain. Everyone retreated, the streetlights making long orange smears across the wet pavement. Brennan drove without music, without the radio, and Simone sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap and her wet hair leaving a damp mark on the seat, and she did not apologize for that, which he noticed and respected without entirely understanding why. 12-hour shift?" he asked. 14, she said. "We lost a 7-year-old this morning." He didn't offer condolences. He didn't say "I'm sorry" in the reflexive, covering way people do when they don't know what else to say. He just let it sit there, acknowledged it with silence, and kept driving. She glanced at him sideways. Most people rushed to fill that kind of silence. She found, unexpectedly, that she didn't mind his version of it. "Here," she said, "the yellow one." He pulled over in front of a narrow Victorian row house with a porch that needed repainting and a window with a crack taped over with clear packing tape. She unclipped her seatbelt and then stopped, her hand on the door. "Thank you," she said, genuinely. "Get inside before your feet get worse," he said. She almost smiled. Not quite. She got out, ran barefoot across the wet front walk, and let herself in without looking back. He sat there for a moment after the door closed. He didn't know why. He had nowhere particular to be except home, and home was a penthouse on King West that he had chosen for its proximity to the office and its view of the lake and almost nothing else, and it was a perfectly adequate place to be. And he was not thinking about any of this as he sat in the dark on Palmerston Avenue and watched the light come on in the front window of her house. He put the car in drive and left. He didn't expect to think about her after that. He was not a man who lingered on things. He had built Collier Capital from a consulting firm with 4 employees and a leased office in Mississauga into one of the largest private infrastructure funds in the country, and he had done it in large part by being someone who moved forward and did not double back. He didn't second-guess decisions. He didn't replay conversations. He replayed that one. Not obsessively. Just the way a particular piece of music will come back to you at odd moments, in the elevator, waiting for a meeting to start, in the 3 minutes before sleep. Your feet are blue. The directness of her. The way she had looked at her own feet with that faint surprise. He reviewed the PICU's budget allocation in December and found himself reading, more carefully than the situation required, the section on nursing staff. Simone Archambault, RN, CCRN. University of Ottawa. 4 years in pediatrics at the Ottawa Civic before transferring to St. Michael's 18 months ago. The unit director's note was still there. Exceptional capacity for family-centered care. Highest patient satisfaction scores in unit for 2nd consecutive quarter. Recommend for senior clinical lead consideration. He closed the file. He opened it again 2 days later. In January, he was back at the hospital for a capital committee meeting, and he saw her in the corridor on the 3rd floor, in scrubs, carrying a chart, walking fast in the particular way of someone who has 14 things to do and is mentally doing 3 of them simultaneously. She saw him at the same moment and paused, just briefly, and then gave a small nod the way you do to someone you've met once and aren't sure quite how to categorize. He nodded back. She kept walking. He stood in the corridor for a moment longer than was necessary, and then went to his meeting and spent 45 minutes discussing structural retrofitting costs, and did not, he told himself, think about her even once. The coffee appeared in late February. He hadn't planned it. He had been in the hospital early for a 7 o'clock call and had picked up 2 coffees from the cafe on the main floor out of some vague, unexamined impulse, and he had left one outside the PICU with the unit clerk with instructions to give it to Simone Archambault when her shift began, and he had gone to his meeting and not thought about it further. Except that wasn't true. He thought about it on and off all day, in the muted, unsettled way of someone who has done something they can't entirely explain to themselves. She didn't mention it when he passed her in the corridor the following week. He left coffee again, and again the week after that, always early, always through the unit clerk, always with the same instructions and no name attached. He told himself it was a small thing, an anonymous kindness. It meant nothing. He left coffee for 12 weeks. In April, he was passing the PICU when she stepped out and nearly walked into him. "It's you," she said. He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. "Good morning." 12 weeks, she said, crossing her arms, studying him with that same direct look she'd had outside in the November rain. "Why?" "You work long hours," he said, "and you make a difference. Someone should acknowledge it." She looked at him for a long moment. He held it, the way he held most things, steady, not apologetic, not defensive. "You could have just said that," she said, instead of being mysterious about it. "Would you have let me?" She opened her mouth, closed it. They both knew the answer. "I have to get back," she said. "I know." She turned and then stopped with her hand on the door. "For what it's worth," she said, without turning around, The dark roast is better than the medium, in case you were wondering." She went back inside. He stood in the corridor and felt something shift in his chest that he had no immediate vocabulary for. He asked her to dinner in May and she said no. She said it plainly, without cruelty and without excessive softening. She said she appreciated the coffee, genuinely, and she thought he was, she paused here, more interesting than she'd expected. But she was 2 years out of a relationship that had ended badly, and she was not in a place where she was looking for anything, and she was sorry. He said he understood. He thought about it for a long time afterward. He was not someone who was told no very often, and he was surprised to discover that the no itself wasn't what stayed with him. It was the more interesting than she'd expected. He turned that over like a stone. What had she expected? What was the version of him she'd had in her mind before she'd found out about the coffee, before she'd climbed into his car in November? He kept leaving coffee. She started leaving notes. Just small ones, written on the back of whatever paper was nearest at hand, a napkin, a prescription pad, a strip of gauze packaging. This one was too hot. Tell them to pull it earlier. And once, had a good day today? Just thought you should know. He kept every one of them in the inside pocket of whatever jacket he was wearing. He did not examine what that meant. The last note came in August. He got to the hospital earlier than usual and went up to the PICU, and the unit clerk, a cheerful woman named Paulette, who had never once asked him any questions about any of this, looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. "She's not here," Paulette said. "When does her shift start?" "She doesn't have one." Paulette hesitated. "She put in her resignation 3 weeks ago. She finished her last shift on Friday." The coffee cup in his hand felt suddenly very heavy. "Did she leave a forwarding address?" "She didn't leave anything," Paulette said gently. "I'm sorry." He walked back to the elevator. He pressed the button. He stood there while the floor numbers changed and didn't feel anything, which was how he knew he felt everything. He didn't look for her. That was the decision he made, standing in the elevator on the way down, and he made it the way he made most decisions. Quickly, cleanly, with the particular finality of someone who had learned that reversing course was its own kind of damage. He had no claim on her. She had said no. She had left him notes about coffee temperature and had told him once that he was more interesting than she expected, and none of that was a claim. He went back to work. He closed a $200 million deal on infrastructure financing in British Columbia. He ran a board meeting in Montreal. He flew to Calgary and flew back. He did every one of these things competently and without visible evidence that anything was different, because nothing was different, because he was not someone who let things be different. He cleaned out the jacket with the notes in the inside pocket in September. He stood in his front hallway holding a small stack of paper scraps and looked at them for a long time. He put them in the drawer of his bedside table. He closed the drawer. 3 years passed. He knew nothing about where she had gone. He had looked once in October, 3 years ago, the night after he had moved the notes from the jacket to the drawer, and had found that Simone Archambault, RN, CCRN, had quietly transferred her nursing registration from Ontario to Alberta. That was all. He had closed the browser window and had not searched again. Alberta. It was a big province. In November of the 3rd year, he was in Calgary for a meeting about a water treatment project near Drumheller. He was in the elevator of his hotel when the doors opened on the 4th floor and Simone Archambault stepped in. She was wearing a heavy coat and carrying a paper bag from a takeout place, and she was looking down at her phone, and then she looked up. The moment lasted the full length of a breath. "Brennan," she said. "Simone." The elevator moved. Neither of them spoke. He was aware of every detail of the confined space, the hum of the cables, the smell of her coat, the paper bag slightly crinkling as her grip tightened on it. "You're here for work," she said, not a question. "Water infrastructure project. You?" "I'm based here now, Children's Hospital." She paused. "Senior clinical lead." He said nothing for a moment. "Then the unit director's note said you should be." She looked at him. What unit director's note? He had said too much. He knew it from the way she was looking at him, recalibrating, reassessing, doing the math on things she hadn't known to add up before. The elevator stopped. 4th floor, her floor apparently. She didn't move. "You read my file," she said. "3 years ago. I was on the board. You read it before November, before the parking lot." "Yes." "So you already knew who I was when you stopped." He held her gaze. "I knew your name and your unit outcome stats. I didn't know you." She stood in the open elevator doorway for a long moment. The doors tried to close and bumped her shoulder and stayed open. She didn't seem to notice. "The coffee," she said slowly. 12 weeks of coffee, was that?" "No," he said, and he meant it. "That was after. That was separate." She was quiet for what felt like a long time, but was probably 15 seconds. He had learned over a decade of negotiations when to wait and when to push, and this was a moment for waiting, and he waited. "I left," she said finally, "because I didn't know what to do with you." He didn't say anything. "You were too much and too quiet at the same time, and I couldn't work out what you wanted, and I was still—" She stopped. "I was still figuring out who I was without someone else's idea of who I should be. And I thought if I stayed, I'd just—" She exhaled. "I didn't know how to have a conversation with you about any of that, so I left instead." "That's honest," he said. "You sound surprised." "I'm not. I just didn't expect you to say it. I've had 3 years to work out what I would say if I ever—" She stopped again. "I didn't actually think I'd have to say it." He looked at her. The paper bag was still in her hands, the takeout cooling inside it, and she was standing half in and half out of the elevator door, in the corridor of a hotel in Calgary on a Tuesday in November. And he was aware that this was one of those moments that bifurcates, that goes one way or another and stays that way. "Have dinner with me," he said, "tonight. Not the coffee, not anything else. Just dinner, and we talk, and you tell me whatever you need to tell me, and I'll do the same. That's all I'm asking." She looked at him for a long time. "I have takeout," she said, gesturing slightly with the bag. "Tomorrow, then." Another long pause. He didn't move. He had gotten very good over the past 3 years at not moving. "All right," she said, "tomorrow." The elevator doors bumped her shoulder again, gently, as though reminding her to decide. She stepped back into the hallway. He watched the doors close between them. He was at the restaurant before her. Of course he was. He was always early. It was a habit so ingrained it had stopped feeling like a habit and become just the shape of how he existed in the world. He sat at the table by the window and watched Winnipeg Street in the November dark and thought about what he wanted to say and discarded most of it. She came in at 7 exactly, coat dusted with snow, and sat down across from him without ceremony. "I looked you up," she said, "when I got back to my room last night. And you've closed 4 major infrastructure deals in the last 3 years. You're on the board of 2 hospitals now, not 1, and apparently you donated anonymously to the University of Ottawa Nursing Scholarship Fund, which I couldn't find the amount, but I found the donor acknowledgement." He said nothing. "Ottawa," she said, "where I went to school." "It's a good program," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Brennan." "There were 3 recipients that year," he said. "Mature students, all of them returning after gaps. That's an underserved population in clinical training. It seemed like a practical investment." "Is that what it was?" He was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to do something that would matter to you," he said, "even if you never knew it was me." "That's not rational." "I know it isn't." She looked at him for a long time in the way she had looked at him in November 3 years ago, outside in the parking lot, measuring something she couldn't entirely name. "The notes I left you," she said. "Did you keep them?" "Yes." "All of them?" "All of them." She looked down at the table. He watched her absorb this. The small notes, the coffee, the scholarship, the 3 years, all of it landing at once in a way that it perhaps hadn't, until now, been allowed to land. "I was afraid of this," she said quietly. "Of you. Of how serious it felt before it had any right to feel that way." "I know," he said. "I was afraid of it too." She looked up. "I don't do things by halves," he said. "I'm aware of what that looks like from the outside. I'm aware it can be." He paused. "A lot." "It's not a lot," she said. "It's just—" She exhaled slowly. You were paying attention when no one else was, and that's... She stopped. It's not something I knew how to receive. Do you know how now? She looked at him across the table in a restaurant in Calgary, snow coming down outside the window, the quiet hum of other people's conversations around them, and she said, I think I'm learning. He reached across the table, not dramatically, not with any particular ceremony, just set his hand on the table near hers, an offering, something she could take or leave. She looked at it for a moment. Then she turned her hand over and let her fingers rest against his. Outside, the snow kept falling on Calgary the way it falls everywhere in November, steadily, without asking permission, covering everything that had been left out in the cold long enough to feel it. I keep thinking about the moment Brennan saw her feet. Not her face, not the shaking, her bare feet on cold concrete in November in Toronto. That's what made him stop, and I think about that a lot. How the thing that finally breaks through our walls is almost never the big, obvious thing. It's the small detail we weren't looking for. Brendan Collier was not a soft man. He built something real out of almost nothing, and that kind of building takes a particular hardness in you, a willingness to keep moving when everything says stop, to close doors cleanly and not look back. He had all of that, and none of it disappeared when he saw Simone sitting outside St. Michael's in the rain. What happened is something different, something I think is worth sitting with. He chose to be decent anyway. Not because it was strategic, not because anyone was watching. He stopped because stopping was the right thing to do, and he knew it without having to think about it. That's the part I find myself returning to. Decency isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like 4 words. You need to go home, and a dark blue Volvo and a man who doesn't explain himself more than necessary. And then there's the way he paid attention. 12 weeks of coffee, notes kept in a jacket pocket, a scholarship to a nursing program in Ottawa, given anonymously years after she'd already left. Brennan didn't broadcast any of it. He just noticed. He read the file. He remembered. He showed up in the small, consistent ways that don't look like much from the outside, but that accumulate into something undeniable over time. There's a kind of intelligence in that, I think. Not the intelligence of cleverness or strategy, but the intelligence of genuinely seeing someone, of understanding that what a person does when they think no one is watching tells you everything about who they actually are. Simone saw it eventually. Not right away. She had her own work to do first, the slow, unglamorous work of figuring out who she was outside of someone else's expectations. That takes courage that doesn't announce itself. She moved provinces. She built a career. She became the senior clinical lead that her unit director had always said she should be. She didn't wait to be found. She just kept going, one shift at a time in a city where nobody knew her history. That's not running away. That's choosing yourself deliberately, which is one of the harder things a person can do. When they found each other again in that Calgary elevator, neither of them performed it. No speeches, no dramatic declarations. Just 2 people telling the truth in a small space, which is maybe all a real relationship ever is. The willingness to say, I was afraid of this, and not dress it up as something else. I don't think it's an accident that it ended the way it did. What Brennan put into the world, the quiet care, the attention, the patience, it didn't disappear when Simone left. It just waited. And what Simone built in those 3 years, the honesty with herself, the life she made on her own terms, that's what made her able to reach back when the moment came. The snow kept falling outside that restaurant window in Calgary, and I think that's the right image to end on, something steady, unhurried, covering everything that had been left out in the cold long enough to feel it. Not erasing it, just finally, gently, giving it somewhere warm to land.